Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Constructing Kingdoms with the Violet Howler, a literary analysis of the Kingdom Hearts story. Today I want to talk about something that I touched on back at the beginning of my second season, but didn't have the time to properly go into detail on. How the majority of worlds in Kingdom Hearts being based on animated kids' movies factors into the story's arguments for the importance of fiction that I discussed in that video. Because when you look at the Disney worlds from a meta perspective as a representation of the Disney brand, there are so many fascinating implications behind not only how the KH universe works, but also how the Disney characters and stories are portrayed. It's up for debate how much of it was intentional, since the games were made by Japanese developers who are obviously going to be writing the story from a perspective that's primarily influenced by Japanese culture, but at the same time, the series is built on stories produced by an American company. Which means that how those pre-existing works are presented in Kingdom Hearts can still potentially say something about the values and beliefs of the culture that those movies were made in, even if the writers of the games weren't consciously thinking of it in those terms. So for today's episode, I'm going to talk about the different layers of potential symbolism that I've noticed in how Disney properties and characters are portrayed by the Kingdom Hearts narrative and what they have to say about Disney as a company. Now without further ado, let's get on with the show.
Ladies and gents, this is the moment you've waited for.
As I outlined in Constructing Kingdoms episode 11, the universe of Kingdom Hearts is one that runs on our attachment to stories. What the series refers to as worlds are not just planets, but the physical manifestations of stories, and hearts are born as a result of the stories that people have to tell based on their memories of and experiences with the world around them. And the fact that worlds based on Disney movies are shown under this pattern to be just as real as original worlds like Radiant Garden and Destiny Islands is making a statement about how fiction is just as important and valuable as the stories we have to share about real events. But there's another layer to this when you factor in how most of those worlds based on existing fictional narratives are conspicuously based on animated kids' movies. Because at least in the United States, I've personally witnessed multiple instances where any media perceived as being for children is treated as innately inferior in both quality and value to media made for older audiences. There are a lot of people who believe that creating fictional media for children is an excuse for creators to put no effort in whatsoever, out of the belief that kids are too young and ignorant to care about the quality of the stories they consume. For many, the only standard that matters for the quality of children's media is how well it can distract kids from bothering their parents like a glorified babysitter. As a byproduct of this, having strong feelings about children's media, positive or negative, or even just enjoying it when you aren't part of the target age group, is viewed as weird or embarrassing at best, and creepy or unhealthy at worst. This attitude even extends to things that audiences merely associate with children, to the point of dismissing entire mediums of storytelling simply because the most well-known examples are marketed to a younger audience. There's a consistent trend of animation as an art form being treated as lesser compared to live action, specifically because people assume that only children will enjoy an animated movie or show, and adults only tolerate it or just don't bother watching. Which is such a common attitude that is even perpetuated by entertainment industry award shows, from the announcers who present the awards during the televised ceremonies, to the people who determine the winners of the animation categories in the first place. This attitude is even present among some corners of the Kingdom Hearts fandom that, in recent years, have been insisting that the series needs to grow up by leaving behind its Disney elements. Which is why the afterlife imagery of Quadratum and the variety of Disney worlds in the franchise add so much more significance to the narrative's message about the importance and value of our bonds with the stories we love. Because when you look at the worlds featured in the series thus far, the world building and symbolism that I discussed earlier potentially serves as a subtle rejection of these attitudes toward kids' movies, as well as towards animation in general. This is a franchise where light-hearted animated stories for young children like Winnie the Pooh exist on the same plane of reality as gritty live-action movies like the Pirates of the Caribbean series, all of which are treated as equally real within the context of the series' world building. The 100-Acre Wood literally exists inside the pages of a children's storybook, yet that world and its inhabitants are no less real than worlds like Port Royal or Radiant Garden. The fact that so many of the worlds featured in Kingdom Hearts are what audiences would consider kids' movies means that the themes of the series are not only asserting that fictional stories matter in general, but that all fiction matters regardless of its target demographic. That books, movies, and shows for younger audiences are just as important, just as valuable, as the stories we make for older ones at both a societal level and a personal one. Because Sora has spent the entire series surrounded by the characters and settings of kids' movies, and as I've touched on in multiple previous videos, his self-inflicted arrival in a place that cuts him off from all of them on a cosmic level is framed as a symbolic death, which can essentially be seen as arguing that completely discarding every quote-unquote childish thing that brings you joy is psychologically unhealthy to the point of self-destruction. Especially given that this metaphorical afterlife is portrayed not as some kind of supernatural fantasy world, but as a near-exact copy of our real, mundane world. In essence, Kingdom Hearts is making the same arguments that Chronicles of Narnia author C.S. Lewis did in his 1952 lecture on 3 Ways of Writing for Children. That being concerned with appearing grown up and avoiding being perceived as childish is a sign that one's psychological development has prematurely stopped. But the stigma against children's media doesn't solely come from people's desire to be seen as mature and adult. In my own experience, at least part of it stems from how kids' shows and movies have a history of being censored either during production or after being released in an effort to either avoid teaching children inappropriate behavior or shield them from unpleasant facts of life. Which is why a lot of animated shows and movies made for adults try to emphasize that they aren't for kids by filling the runtime with swearing, graphic violence, sex, nudity, drugs, and all other kinds of things that are considered unacceptable in media aimed at younger audiences. And some of that censorship in children's media is understandable to a degree. Young kids are still growing up and learning how to distinguish right from wrong or fantasy from reality, and typically lack the experiences or vocabulary to understand and process when something bad happens in their lives. Plus, there are some things in life that require enough maturity to understand the inherent risks in order to engage with them responsibly. And there are fictional portrayals of some subjects that, if not handled with care, can end up just being traumatizing regardless of any narrative value. Which means that stories which want to tackle heavy subjects like death or abuse or war need to strike a careful balance in how those topics are handled so that they're respectful to the subject matter without causing confusion or excess distress to their young audience. But some people in creative industries are so paranoid about parents accusing them of sending inappropriate messages to children that they try to censor anything that hypothetical parents could object to. From on-screen depictions of death and violence, to characters using words that hypothetical parents might insist are inappropriate even when they are completely innocent in context. This censorship often occurs during the production stage, like how some shows are only allowed to imply a character died without showing a death on screen, or how villains can die on screen as long as it's the result of their own actions instead of the heroes actively killing them. But even moments of violence or potentially sensitive content that do make it to the final cut may still end up censored even after the production has already been released. Which has frequently been done with media from other countries when they're being distributed officially in the United States, like the English dubs of anime in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, for example. The consistency of enforcement varies from company to company and from year to year depending on both the attitudes of the current person in charge of the relevant department and the willingness of creators to push back. But it has been known at times to reach the point where some children's media will end up going out of their way to avoid even mentioning words related to certain topics, even when that topic is a major element of the plot. Like how many kids' movies and shows will go out of their way to avoid using words like die, dead, or killed, even when death is clearly happening to characters in the narrative. Something which Kingdom Hearts itself recently mocked in the finale of Dark Road, where Hades calls out the upperclassmen for using vague euphemisms when talking about people who have straight up died. Disney is particularly infamous for both of these kinds of censorship when it comes to the media they produce, as their adaptations of existing books and fairy tales famously tone down darker elements of the source material to make their version more suitable for modern children. Characters who died in the source material will survive in their version. Personalities or backstories will be altered in order to make clear-cut heroes or villains out of characters who were neutral or morally gray in the original story. And darker elements or other unpleasant details will be omitted in order to give audiences a straightforward happy ending. As a result of this kind of censorship, the reputation of Disney's brand is one that's aimed at very young children that keeps everything safe and sanitized so that little kids can watch it, with a couple of risque jokes thrown in so that parents don't get bored when they sit through it with their kids. It's to the point where, after their acquisition of Star Wars in 2012, many fans of the franchise, admittedly including myself, were openly fearing that Star Wars was going to be dumbed down and scrubbed of all but the most cartoony violence in order for Disney to appeal to younger viewers. Yet even as children's media has to be careful about how they acknowledge and explore serious topics, it is still vitally important that those stories still be allowed to do so at all. Trying to keep kids ignorant of things that happen in real life in an effort to protect their innocence carries the risk of leaving them unequipped and unprepared to deal with things like death or abuse when they encounter them in real life. Much like how Master Odin lying to his younger students at the beginning of Dark Road about what was going on with Baldur and the upperclassmen directly caused them to blindly follow Baldur to their deaths because they didn't know anything was wrong when they saw him out and about. In contrast, learning about difficult subjects in fiction helps children develop the knowledge and vocabulary to be able to, say, cope with the death of a family member or spot the warning signs of someone being abused. And for kids who have already experienced those kinds of things personally, avoiding those subjects can lead to feelings of isolation, as the media that's considered appropriate for their age group reflects a standard of what childhood is like that doesn't match their lived experiences. But having access to fictional stories with characters they can relate to, whose experiences resemble their own, can provide them with a sense of catharsis by showing them that they're not alone in their struggles. So as mascots of the Disney company, Donald and Goofy's performance as Sora's parental figures could be seen as a commentary on how the censorship of heavier subjects in children's media that Disney is known for can be harmful to the very kids that censors are trying to protect. Because despite their good intentions, by repeatedly insisting that Sora always put on a happy face, Donald and Goofy have been denying him the chance to truly process how he feels about all the bad things happening around him, or get any kind of catharsis. And since he hasn't been able to express his pain, anger, or other negative emotions, Sora has been continuing to repress all the trauma of everything he's been through out of the belief that being open about those feelings will make him undesirable. This potential symbolism of Donald and Goofy's portrayal in Kingdom Hearts can also be taken a step further when you factor in the queer subtext of the series that I talked about in previous videos. Because in the minds of many people who engage in this over-sanitizing of children's media, queerness is no different than the violence and other sensitive topics that they think children need to be protected from knowing about. It has always been acceptable for children's media to depict a boy kissing a girl and going on dates with her, or a man marrying a woman and having kids with her. But for decades, a man doing those things with another man, or a girl doing them with another girl, has automatically been wrongly treated as inherently inappropriate for kids. As a result, even when queerness has become more accepted in society, companies like Disney that produce stories for children have still been slow to include overtly queer characters in their works for fear of backlash from homophobic parents. Multiple employees of Disney have called out the company's leadership over the years for blocking them from openly portraying one or more characters as queer so that their projects can pull in more profits from markets that are hostile toward the existence of queer people. And while there has been some notable progress in recent years, most of the overt queerness that Disney leadership has allowed through has either been side characters only there for one scene, or a throwaway line that can be cut out with no impact on the story whatsoever. Just as children's media's avoidance of darker subjects can be isolating to kids who have personal experience with the subjects being avoided, the way that children's media has historically excluded queer characters has a similar effect for kids who aren't straight or cisgender. Because only being exposed to heteronormative and cisnormative media can leave queer kids feeling invisible at best and broken at worst. That their experiences of not fitting into that hetero and cisnormative ideal are an anomaly that has never happened before to anyone else, and that there is something wrong with them for having experiences with romance or gender that go against what the stories they read and watch say those things are supposed to be like. Meanwhile, for kids who haven't realized they aren't straight or cis, the lack of people like them in fiction deprives them of the vocabulary to recognize why their feelings don't match what the media around them is presenting as the way people are supposed to be. Which, as a guy who didn't realize he was bi until college, I speak of from personal experience. But having access to stories that feature queer characters in major roles helps to combat that stigma by sending the message to children in the audience that there's nothing wrong with being gay or trans or ace or any other flavor of queerness. It gives queer kids who haven't figured out why they feel different the examples and vocabulary to finally articulate their own feelings, and sends a message to all kids, queer or not, that it's okay to be different and that there's not just one acceptable standard of normality for people to live by. Which they especially need to hear if they're living in an environment where the people around them are not accepting of queer identities. As I've mentioned in previous videos, Donald and Goofy have made multiple comments in early games that automatically assumed it was a given that Sora was attracted to girls. Yet Kingdom Hearts 3 and the character files reveal that despite having spent the entire series surrounded by straight Disney couples and everyone assuming that he's destined to end up with Kairi, Sora is still confused over what romantic love is and how it's different from friendship because he doesn't know how to recognize what being in love is supposed to feel like. At the same time, the character files show him struggling to find an accurate label for his relationship with Riku, which the narrative has repeatedly paralleled with canon Disney romances. So in the context of the narrative criticizing Disney's reputation for censoring kids' media, Donald and Goofy's early heteronormativity could be seen as potential commentary on how lack of exposure to queer identities in fiction hurts queer kids' ability to figure themselves out. Which would make their growth to the point where they tease Sora in Kingdom Hearts 3 because he called a Riku lookalike good-looking and listens to Riku more than anyone else, a potential reflection of changing attitudes within companies like Disney. Regardless of whether or not it was intentional, the Kingdom Hearts story manages to send some very pointed messages about both the value of the movies the series was built upon and the actions of the company that made them. The subtext of the series places the focus of the narrative's message about the importance of fiction onto children's media specifically. And in doing so, it challenges attitudes about the kind of movies the franchise uses that are common in the place where those particular stories were made, while simultaneously criticizing the company that made them in the first place. And all of these different layers of potential symbolism are so incredibly fitting in light of how much of the overall plot structure lines up with the framework of the heroine's journey as I've discussed in previous videos. Because in a narrative framework built around challenging social expectations, what better way for a story built on one specific company's existing works to convey its arguments than to also critique that same company's contributions to the very expectations it's criticizing? Thank you all so much for watching. As always, if you have any thoughts, observations, or counter-arguments about anything I've said here in this video, feel free to share in the comments below. And if you want to be notified the next time I upload, feel free to click subscribe, and I'll see you back here again on April 29th for my next video.